So the topic for this evening is accessibility in UX. So accessibility defines users' ability to use products and services, but not the extent to which they can attain goals, because that word is taken, that's usability. Designers should create output accommodating the needs of all potential users, be they disabled, such as colorblind users, or anyone facing situational barriers. For example, anyone being forced to multitask. So that's kind of everybody. That was a long definition, so I'll call out a little highlight, right? Accessibility defines users' ability to use products and services, right? So I like to use illustrations, and I call this out from my own life. We've all used the MTA system from time to time, and you know, I've used it many times, going and walking up the steps to the train or walking down the steps to the subway. You think nothing of it. You know, all the folks in this photo, they look like they probably can take the stairs with no trouble. You know, I was always aware of the elevators and the escalators to access the trains. I didn't really care that much about them. I tended to avoid them because, you know, they're pretty slow, and sometimes there's a funny odor inside the elevator or whatever, you know, whatever it is. So I kind of just thought, well, the MTA system has to pay for it, but it's really not that critical. Of course, you're aware that some people need it, but I'll be honest, I didn't need it, so it didn't really enter my head on a personal level that it was important, right? And the reason I bring that up, you know, I think many people, you've got, you know, real sensible business people. They're looking at the numbers. They're running a business. And when you're designing a digital product or a digital experience, you know, you've got to always be conscious of the business needs, right? I think many people kind of write off accessibility, and it's a real shame because they think of it as kind of this niche problem. They know that it's the right thing to do, but I think many people feel that they can't afford it, or that it's kind of almost like a luxury to even consider the right thing to do in some people's minds. To continue with the illustration though, something happened in my life which changed everything. This guy happened, and his sister happened a few years before that. Suddenly, for me, the elevators mattered a whole lot. I started to realize, wait a minute, there's no elevator at the train station where I live. There are many, many subway stops that don't have elevators. And I started to think, well, wait a minute, like, I'm having a real hard time getting around the city. And this is just a temporary thing. This is just, you know, take my kids out on the weekend or something. But it really helped me to stop and, like, empathize. Like, wait a minute, that's a critical piece of infrastructure that some people just can't use. And, like, that's just wrong. Construction of elevators at Floral Park Station anticipated to begin in the spring of 2019. People were talking about this for a long time. What ended up making it an actual issue was the ADA issue, the fact that certain individuals with disabilities could not access this station. So the point is, we're making something better. We're treating it as an accessibility issue, but then that ends up making it better for everybody, right? So that's why the theme of tonight is designing for everybody. There were 814 federal web accessibility lawsuits filed in 2017. And this is kind of the continuing trend. It started many years ago. Target was sued because some folks couldn't use the website. And I can tell you that number is accelerating. More and more companies are being sued because someone who is visually impaired or cognitively impaired is trying to use the website and they can't do it. It's the digital equivalent of not being able to get on that train, right? And certain states in this country are leading the charge on lawsuits. Do we have any guesses on which states? Does anyone want to throw out some ideas?
New York.
Did you say New York?
Yep.
Okay. Any other guesses, ideas? Hello? California? New York, California. Good guesses.
Chicago.
Did you say Chicago? Yeah, it's a good guess. It's a good guess. Well, Illinois, you know. It's Montana. Wrong. Who said New York? All right. You get an apple. And Florida is a close second at 325. So these are the states leading the charge. So if you're doing business in the United States, beware. That's a hard-headed reason to care about accessibility in digital design, right? And if that's not enough, you think, well, we'll probably not get sued. It's also good for revenue. Okay. Think about search engine optimization. Many of the things that you do, if you say, okay, we need to do an accessibility audit of our website, of our app, of our product, and you start going through and you start fixing things up and you start improving the writing, you start improving the design. I don't know exactly how the search engines rank things because that's a well-guarded secret in the industry. However, we know for sure that when you start optimizing for accessibility, that search engine optimization does improve. And who doesn't want to be on good terms with Google? And also, why am I showing you a pie? A piece of the pie, right? If a certain percentage of the population can't use your thing that you've built, what, you don't want their money? Like, these are reasons to convince sort of the business stakeholders and other folks to actually invest time and money in accessibility. And by the way, if your competitor is accessible and you're not, who's going to get that piece of the pie, right? What if English isn't your first language? What if you're very new to the English language? Or what if you don't speak English at all, but the site happens to only be in English and you want to translate it? Many of the practices to make your site accessible would also make it easier for someone to understand if English is not their first language, or make it easier to translate. You know, that goes back to the pie. You're able to satisfy more people, so you get this one sort of centralized accessibility effort, and it starts to have all of these sort of benefits that sort of put your business ahead, put your website ahead. And I guess I've touched on it already, but it's good for quality, right? Anybody who's even played around with HTML knows that you can do a lot of stuff in HTML, and it will kind of work. HTML is very flexible, right? However, holding yourself to that higher standard of being accessible, I think, is a nice check on quality. So that way you can be sure that your code is written a little bit more cleanly, and then that has the effect of making things easier to update in the long run. So it's one more reason to be motivated to maintain high quality. Responsiveness, right? Many of the things that make a website more accessible will also make them work across devices a lot better. And that relates back to even like load times, the way things are written, the structuring of your content. Do it all under the banner of accessibility, and then you get these ancillary benefits. I guess I'm driving the point home a lot here, but it ends up being good for everybody. And then it made me start to think of the inventions that, you could say that they're good for folks who have some types of disabilities, but they end up being good for everybody. I read in The Economist that one of the reasons why the television remote control was invented was to help people with mobility limitations. This relationship is sort of inextricably intertwined, right? If it's good for people with disabilities, then it's good for everybody. And then this can kind of lead to a virtuous cycle of innovation. Some other things, right? people with visual impairments, they need sort of this voice technology. And what happens, that technology then evolves and it ends up becoming good for everybody. So we see the echo. And by the way, it's almost a footnote at this point, although it shouldn't be. It is good for people with disabilities. Imagine someone who goes through their life blind, or hearing impaired, or they're limited in their mobility. There might be things that up until recently they just weren't able to do, right? There might be certain jobs that they just couldn't even apply for because maybe it was, a job at a desk looking at paperwork, and you just weren't able to do it. Now with technology, it opens up worlds to people. That means everything to them. And, this is the word. You don't need to then rely on charity. You can go out and earn a living and have that feeling that you've accomplished something and contribute. Completely different world for folks. So it's really a very exciting time, I think, for many people. Okay, so those were sort of the reasons why. It's funny to like belabor the reasons why, but oftentimes you might find yourself toe to toe with some business stakeholder or somebody who kind of isn't convinced. And so I think it's useful to realize that no, we're not only thinking about this small group of people, although it means everything to that group of people. We're actually thinking about everybody, including ourselves, because it's good for the business. I think it's useful to talk about the different types of disabilities that are considered. We talk about accessibility, persons with disabilities. Who exactly are we talking about? Is it only blind people? Are we only talking about screen readers? No, we're talking about kind of a wide range of people. Vision impairments, that I've mentioned that a couple times tonight. That's probably one of the disabilities that comes to mind first. When I started studying this, I of course considered folks who are blind. But there's a whole spectrum of folks in between who are, partially blind, legally blind, completely blind. So it pays to sort of realize that there's a widespread. I see a couple folks here tonight wearing glasses. You could argue, hey, what if you forgot your glasses one day? That's kind of a visual impairment.
If you forgot your glasses now, you have to sit in the front.
He said, what if you forgot your glasses now and you have to sit in the front? Exactly. Is there anyone in this room who knows a person who is colorblind? 1, 2, 3, 4. What is that? 60, 70% of the room? And there are different types of color blindness, but that's a lot of people. So the takeaway there is if you're creating this beautiful design with color, but the color is the only thing communicating the information, you might want to step back from that and kind of consider how you can make that a meaningful experience to folks with different types of color blindness. And we'll cover more on that in a little while. There are also motor impairments, right? And one of the things, a big thing to call out with, the idea of motor impairments, folks that maybe are not able to use a mouse, or folks who maybe are not able to tap on a touchscreen. For whatever reason, there's a variety of reasons. You can make everything in your design keyboard accessible, where, keyboard shortcuts, arrow keys, tab keys, the enter key. You can go through and whatever it is you're working on now, you can go in and check that and make sure. Don't forget to check the things that pop up, right? The things that drop down, the things that are hidden. Make sure it's all keyboard accessible. cognitive impairments. Those are also considered when we talk about accessibility. And there are a wide range of reasons why someone may have a cognitive impairment, but ultimately it boils down to, you might have some challenges with memory, problem solving, attention span, comprehension with reading, comprehension with math. One reason that happens, and maybe we'll all get there, is old age. So if for no other reason, at least design with like your future self in mind. Be kind to your future self. Many of the techniques that solve accessibility address cognitive issues. And this one blew my mind when I realized this was part of it too. Temporary impairments, right? I'm sure we've all had a temporary impairment of some kind, everyone in this room, because they cover all kinds of things. Imagine that, you're driving somewhere, it's a sunny day, you're looking for your sunglasses and you can't find your sunglasses. You could argue that that's a temporary visual impairment, right? Try using a touch screen. You're outside in the cold, waiting for your ride to come get you. We didn't talk too much about hearing, but that's also part of it. Think about having a conversation in a loud restaurant. And then distracting coworkers. Here at Cox Automotive, we do a lot of work for people who work at auto dealerships, right? Working at an auto dealership, that's a distracting place to be. You've got your coworkers, you've got customers. Imagine what that means for your design if you're trying to design something which requires a complex amount of concentration. So that's all well and good, but what should we do about it? Don't rely on color alone. You can, of course, think of color as an enhancer of your design, absolutely, because we want folks to enjoy what we're building, but don't rely on it to communicate information. And also mind your contrast. So those are kind of the two color things. One suggestion, now everyone has a different design process, right? Everyone's comfortable doing things differently. Some believe in hand sketching, some believe in, black and white wireframes. Some just go directly into the high fidelity stuff. I would consider designing in grayscale or monochrome first, and then kind of thinking of color as a layer on top. Or if you're not comfortable with that, you like visualizing in color, at least then take your design and kind of put a zero saturation filter over it, and that will help you to realize, like, okay, if you consider folks who don't see color at all, and if it works that way, then you'll probably have your bases covered, right? There are color blindness simulators for Sketch, Chrome, iOS, and others. Anyone in here use Sketch? Yeah? Okay, about half the room. You can write this down. There's a plugin called Stark, S-T-A-R-K. And while you're working in Sketch, you can then simulate various forms of color blindness. And there are others. And then there are color contrast checkers. You can plug in your hexadecimal numbers and get that directly from your web code or Photoshop or whatever you're working in, Sketch. And it'll let you know whether or not you're passing or failing. And what I mean by that is there's the WCAG sort of puts out these accessibility guidelines. And essentially there's AA and there's AAA. AAA is really extreme contrast if you're really, really focused on specialty populations. We strive at least for AA. And basically what that means is, you might really love a design because it's got some subtlety of color. But if it doesn't pass this, that means that certain people will find it hard to see. And it also means that on certain monitors, certain screens, or in bright sunlight, it might also be hard to see. And then this was just an example. Like, imagine this in black and white. And we see this all over the place where, in the early days, all the hyperlinks had underlines. And nowadays, people have removed them. I would consider putting them back. It doesn't have to be some goofy-looking, chunky underline. It could be a subtle little thing. But not only will it then be visible in black and white, it'll also be sort of a familiar pattern that everybody knows, so you're capitalizing off of that. And think of other things like the red error message text. Other things, layout, things you can do when you're laying your page out. And by the way, you probably know these already because these are just good UX principles to begin with, right? But sometimes we're tempted to stray from these principles because we want to do something innovative. And don't lose that innovative spirit. But remember that if you're being wildly inconsistent from screen to screen and your menu's over here and then it's over here and then it's down here, that you're throwing people off, and especially folks with cognitive disabilities. Clear wayfinding. Essentially that means, I click on a menu item and there's a little indicator of where I am in the website. That's the you are here kind of marker, right? A clear headline on the page that kind of states where you are. There are a variety of ways to do this, and it doesn't mean you need to be kind of shackled to these constraints to kill your creativity. I hope it doesn't feel that way. But it's one other set of things to pay attention to make your experience better for the people. Break your text up with headlines and subheads, of course. And use familiar design elements like that underlined hyperlink. Everyone knows what it is, You can make it look good. Please make it look good. But use things that are familiar. If you find yourself inventing something brand new, an interaction that's brand new, that's never been seen on the web before, that might work depending on who your users are. But I would, just as often, it's kind of like a red flag that maybe you're making things hard on your user. Meetup group page. What works well here and what could be done better? I don't know if you all just probably use your phone when you're looking at the meetup. But, I don't know, when you're looking at this screen, does anybody... I have no opinion here. Is it good? Is it bad? Is there anything that you would do differently?
It looks good. I like how there's a hierarchy within the page.
Hierarchy within the page? Yeah, for sure.
Titles so that you know what you're looking at. The only thing I could see that could be different is where the share is. I guess that could probably be underneath versus the LIUX instead of it being on the right hand side. So you think the share is kind of in a strange location over on the left side? Yeah. I feel like it is. Yeah. And I feel like it's not. I'm kind of, I don't know. I'm indifferent with it, but I feel like I could probably position differently. But that's all subjective.
Yeah. Well, you're saying it's subjective, but if you went and spoke to 5 people, and they all thought the same thing, now you're measuring their subjectivity, and now you're onto something, right?
So I noticed that there aren't any clear keyboard shortcuts on this webpage, and it's actually something that I kind of wanted to ask you about.
Clear keyboard shortcuts. Yeah, interesting.
So
Interesting.
I don't really see that anywhere really anymore. Where you're
yeah, specific keyboard shortcuts.
As in, if I wasn't able to, only was able to use a keyboard to navigate around this website.
Sure. Well, oftentimes on the web, if you were on this web page and you started using the tab key, would you see a visual indicator of where you were? You should be able to at least tab through a web page. And then when you get to the item you want, you select enter and you can activate that item. So, yeah, it's a little bit binary, right? It's a little bit simplified, But it is still possible, right? But yeah, it's a really good point. Anyone else have anything to say about this meetup page?
I'll go.
Yes.
Links aren't underlined. There's icons that may or may not be labeled.
Links aren't underlined. There are icons that may or may not be labeled. Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
Even those like avatars, like what would happen on a screen reader? Would it read their names, or I don't know.
Yeah.
how that works.
What would happen with the avatars with the screen reader? That's a good question. That brings up a point that I didn't really touch on, which is alt tags. Is anyone familiar with alt tags? Yeah? Yeah? Okay. So in case you don't know, an alt tag is something in the HTML code that you assign to an image. And essentially, if someone can't see the page for any reason, the alt tag should fill in whatever information would have been missed. What that means, like if sometimes you've got an image that's purely decorative, and you can leave the alt tag blank because it actually doesn't help someone. But if that information, if that photo provides any kind of information that's useful, then you can, in a very clear and concise way, write down what's in the image. Yes.
So looking at the about here, looks like it's highlighted using like a light blue, right?
On the top, it looks like it's a light blue.
Yeah, so right underneath the LIUX picture, there is an about. It looks like it's a tab that's selected address.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's very confusing for me, right? So that looks like it should be a not enabled indicator, because it's like very, very light and difficult to read.
So I'll restate what you said. So we've got a menu there. The first item in the menu says about. It's a different color. The only differentiator is color. And to make matters worse, you're saying it's lighter, so it looks, at least to your eyes, currently through this technology, it looks like it might be disabled.
It doesn't
Yeah,
pass the
and
squint
then-
test.
What was that?
It doesn't pass the squint test.
It doesn't pass the squint test. How many people here are writers? Okay, one. How many people here are designers? Okay, more than one. I would suggest to you that if you're a designer, that you're also kind of a writer too, in some ways, or at least a UX writer. If you've ever found yourself finessing a button label, or just a link or something, you're trying to get the wording right, I would say that writing is a part of design, and it pays to acknowledge that. And I don't know, you might have come across some of these things, some of these decisions in your life, maybe not, but it's worth mentioning, like, watch out for those unclear idioms, and what I mean by that is sometimes we'll say something that Americans will understand, but someone from somewhere else wouldn't get it because it's like a baseball reference or something. Make sure that, put yourself in that mindset and make sure that you're being clear. Don't take all the humanity out of your writing, because you shouldn't sound like a robot either. But if you're saying something which really might be unclear to a large set of people, it's a red flag. I would also say, especially for buttons and links, you do want to be pretty literal. You also want to be pretty clear. You want to communicate very clearly what will happen when that button is tapped. So obviously, if you say continue, like continue to what? That's an opportunity to sort of be more clear for everyone. Also, if it says like submit application on the button, when you tap that button, if it starts the application process or something else happens, make sure you're not like jumping ahead with your button labels. And whoever it is, they'll appreciate the clarity and sort of the literalness of it. And then, you've heard this before, keep it short, keep it concise, write only what you have to say, and then cut it in half and then cut it in half again. A few examples. Instead of knocking it out of the park, it's a successful completion, right? Instead of saying click here, you can say, read more about UX writing. Log in versus sign in. Once you start noticing that one, you'll start to see it everywhere. And avoid double negatives. And what I mean by that is, of course, we all know what a double negative is. We shouldn't not do something. Well, we should do something. It's clear that up. But also, it even boils down to things like this, like check the box to turn off notifications. That's kind of a double negative too, because you're turning something on in order to turn something off. So, but yeah, that's what I got. I'm going to leave this on the screen for a minute, and Andrew's going to come up and cover some, demonstrate some things.
Yeah, I'm just going to show some of the tools
But I think